Hello. Okay, so we've finally reached the point now in my Primarchs video series where we're going to talk about who I think is actually the top three for single combat. Um, so you probably have some idea if you've watched some of the other videos who I'm going to say, but hopefully some of it will be a surprise. But let's see. So who I think is number one, I think it has to be Sanguinus. Not a controversial pick, I hope. The reason I picked him is obviously it is a huge part of who he is. This is his incredible ability in close combat. It's a big characteristic of his legion as well, which is due to his gene seed. Um, he is incredibly skillful. He's also very physically strong. Agile. He literally has all of the characteristics that someone would need to be great in single combat. He's very intelligent. He also has big advantage with his precognition ability, although that is less seen in the descriptions of his combat than you see with the other person that has that, which is Kurz. But it is implied that it's essentially the same ability. Perhaps he doesn't need to use it as much because he is more skillful than Kurz in that sense. I think the other reason that I would pick Sanguinus is because the other Primarchs often acknowledge him as being the one that's up, is the best of them, and not all of them, because but a lot of the Primarchs have a lot of chips on their shoulders and don't, always say what is actually see reality as it is. But I think when when Primarchs are reflecting on the other Primarchs that in the Horus Heresy series, when you actually hear their inner voice, they're not trying to boast to someone else, or they're not trying to insult someone. They're reflecting internally. They often will acknowledge Sanguinus as the best. And I think even Horus, it's very strongly implied, and maybe even blatantly stated, that Horus feels like he is actually not as good as Sanguinus in many ways, but particularly in individual combat and as a general. And Horus obviously is incredibly good at most things. That's why he was picked as War Master. But so even he doubts that he's as good as Sanguinus. Now, Sanguinus is kind of the opposite to Horus in that he's very modest, so he never really would state outwardly that he's the best. But it is reasonably fair to say that the others think that. I mean, the Lion, for example, respects him. He doesn't respect really any of his other brothers. Only Sanguinus is the one he respects. Guilliman, selects him as the new emperor essentially when they think the emperor's dead. Partly because he would pick anyone because he just wants any one of his Primarch brothers to be emperor because he thinks that there has to be one, and he doesn't want to make himself emperor because that would look bad. But at the same time, the person he most wants to be alive and to be able to pick is Sanguinus. So he's the one that he respects the most, and I think that's a general feeling amongst the Primarchs that Sanguinus is the best, not just at single combat, in fact, but just in generally, and probably obviously. I mean, that's a running theme within the Horus Heresy, is that really Sanguinus should have been picked to be the War Master, and that's kind of the fact that he isn't, and it's Horus that eventually leads to the heresy. Although that's probably a gross simplification. I mean, if Horus hadn't been picked, he probably would have had more of a reason to become a traitor because he would have resented that. So it is hard to say. But Sanguinus, I think, wouldn't have. It's much more likely that he would never have turned against the Emperor. In fact, that Chaos really tried to turn Sanguinus against the Emperor, because actually it's also reasonably fair to say, I would say, that the Chaos Gods actually would prefer Sanguinus as their puppet, as their leader of the heresy. But he won't turn, and Horus even is worried that he will be replaced by Sanguinus as the leader of the Chaos, inspired rebellion. So it's kind of like he's worried in two levels, like that he's worried that he's not good enough to be the War Master and that Sanguinus actually should have been. But he's also worried that, and now he's turned to traitor, that Sanguinus would be picked by the Chaos Gods to replace him as the leader of the rebellion. So that says a lot about Horus's opinion of Sanguinus, and how he basically has this inferiority complex that Sanguinus is really better than him. So yeah. Anyway, that's probably going too far. But certainly, there's plenty of evidence throughout the Horus Heresy books that the number one Primarch is Sanguinus as an all-rounder, but also his outstanding characteristic is his close combat ability. So I think he has to be number one. So number two, I'm going to go for Angron. Why Angron? Well, I think it speaks for himself, really. It's the one thing he is good at. He is so good at single combat that the other Primarchs often, again, when they're kind of contemplating their own ability, their own likelihood of winning combat, the one that often comes up as someone they're afraid to. Well, afraid is probably not the right word for a Primarch, but the one that they have hesitation about is Angron. They do all, whenever they kind of think of that, the idea of having to face Angron, they all sort of think, okay, could I actually win? Now, some of them will then work through that and go, yeah, I think I could find a way to win. Whereas others will just be like, I can even think about doing that. So, but certainly Angron is the one that makes Primarchs pause for thought when they think about having to face him. He's obviously also one who's probably had the most combat in his life, single combat. He's just spent his life brought up as a gladiator, constantly fighting to the death. Now, we don't really know how hard those fights were for a Primarch to deal with, but the fact that it is for entertainment purposes, it's probably being pushed to his limits all the time. As he was probably getting better and better because he was, would have started as a child, and they probably just kept giving him opponents more and better and to push him for entertainment purposes. Because a very easy fight to win is not very entertaining. So I imagine they were trying to always push him to his limits, and he kept winning, kept surviving. And then, when he was eventually found by the Emperor, reintroduced into the Imperium and became a head of the Legion, he then just went off and fought. The Legion were always fighting; they're always looking for the next fight, and he was always leading from the front. Well, I say leading is probably not the right word because he did very little actual leading, but they just looked for the next fight and dive straight in. And so he was always fighting, always always surviving. He always survives. He always wins. He finds a way because he's unrelenting need to fight, and he's actually, the fact that he actually lived to the point of the heresy is testament to how good he is, because he never really took any precautions to protect himself. He would often just, without any plans, just go straight into a fight. He would put himself into very difficult positions all the time and managed to fight his way out because that's just the way he is. That's how good he is. Of course, he's not very good at anything else. He shouldn't really be in charge of a legion, let's be honest. He's got no tactical ability whatsoever, mainly because he doesn't think about it, not because, he's a Primarch. He's probably got the intellect for it. He just doesn't engage that part of his mind, partly because of probably largely because of the Butcher's Nails. But it doesn't seem like that is anything he ever considers. He just needs to fight, and that's it. So he's in there. I'm going to put him as second because he's also incredibly physically powerful, as well as very skillful and very practiced in the art of fighting individual combat. And third, this is probably the only really controversial pick, is Konrad Curze. So I did a video about him a couple of days ago. He I think is the big dark horse of this conversation, not mentioned as much as the more obvious candidates. So I have put him in there, and I think I see him in a similar way to what he sees himself, which is the dark version of Sanguinus. I think he has the same precog ability as we've already talked about. He's very sort of all-round ability for fighting is there. He's big, he's powerful. He's not bulky, but he is strong and imposing. He has that kind of psychotic, unrelenting ability that you get from Angron as well, but really doesn't seem to phase any kind of, the idea of being killed or taking any damage doesn't phase him in the slightest. But I don't think he's quite as skillful as the other as Sanguinus. I don't think he's quite as powerful as Angron. So that's why I put him in third. So I think that's a reasonable top three. So it'd be very interesting to hear people in the comments who they think should have been in that top 3 that I've missed out. Perhaps who's in the top 3 shouldn't be there. I know I'd be surprised if many people thought Sanguinus and Angrong shouldn't be in the top 3 for single combat, but if you don't, that'd be interesting. And if you don't think Kerr should be there, who should be there instead? It'd be great to hear that. Also, is there anyone I haven't mentioned at all that I just haven't considered that should be in the conversation at least? I did try to pick up many of the people I think often go overlooked. So if you haven't seen those videos, look at those videos and see me talk about them. Now, there is one more person that I haven't mentioned so far that I'm going to do a separate video on next, who in many ways, in fact, should be number 1 if you consider their full ability. And so I'm going to talk about in that video why I haven't included them here and why I think they should be, in fact, number 1. And that is actually Magnus. So now this will be very controversial. So if you want to see that, look out for that video, because that'll be my next video. Thanks very much, and see you next time.